Hello, fellow Webtoon fans and creators. I'm Audrey, and this is the Webtoon Wave podcast. This week, I sat down with Trevor Meuller. He is a writer of Nexus Point and Re-possessed on Webtoon Originals. Trevor is an accomplished comic writer with 20 years and dozens of books under his belt. And today, I'm going to find out exactly how he did it. Hey, Trevor, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for appearing on it. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I always love to talk to fellow Webtoon enthusiasts and share my experience with people who are looking to try to get something out of it so that they can either make their own Webtoons or just kind of see the behind the scenes of how the sausage gets made.
Yeah, and I was really interested because you have so much experience with just comics and storytelling for comics, and I'm really curious on how that lends itself into writing for webcomics in particular.
Yeah, sure. No, happy to talk about that at length. Because my background is in traditional print comics, and so pivoting over into Webtoon was new for me. That was an opportunity to kind of flex some new muscles and try something different. So I often kind of compare like a lot of the Webtoon experiences to print comics. Like when I think about like a 50 panel episode of Webtoon, I'm like, on a 5 panel per page average, that equals to about 8 to 10 pages of print comics. Like that's just how my head naturally works. And I'm sure there are lots of people out there who work in the reverse when they're like, I'm now pivoting from Webtoon into print comics. And how many episodes do I need to fill a full issue? So if I do that, just keep in mind that that's just where my experience comes from. And then I've been doing the Webtoon thing for the last 2-3 years across 2 series. So it's been fun, and I'm excited to share those experiences with you.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear it. So, give us an introduction to you. Tell me about your experience in comics.
Yeah, sure. So, to anyone who doesn't know, hi, my name is Trevor. My background is in comic book writing. I've been writing comics my entire life, but I've been doing it professionally for about 20 years. And for the last 2 years, I've actually been doing it exclusively. This has been the thing that pays my bills. Webtoons, I've been into that since about 3 years ago. I got 2 Webtoon original series greenlit in the same year. So not only did I jump into the deep end, but I decided to jump off of the high dive into the deep end when it came to doing vertical scroll storytelling, and that's been a fun experience. My 2 series on there are Nexus Point, which is a cyberpunk action story about hackers fighting bounty hunters, and then I also wrote a series called Re-possessed, which was a love letter to 70s and 80s era horror stories, embracing the fact that they're kind of silly by today's standards, and that one's about college kids working at a pawn shop that sells demonically possessed items, and hilarity ensues. But prior to that, I mean, I started off doing a lot of web comics before vertical scroll and Webtoon platforms kind of existed. My claim to fame was a series called Albert the Alien, which was about the first foreign exchange student from outer space. And that series got nominated for 2 Harvey Awards, and we funded that on Kickstarter into 4 graphic novels. I do a lot of web comics and self-publishing as well. And then I travel the world doing workshops at schools, libraries, comic conventions, anime shows, etc., trying to help inspire the next generation of storytellers to tell their story and to get the tools and information that they need to be able to do that easier versus needing to kind of jump into making their own stories without any kind of background or experience along the way. Because that was my biggest hurdle when I was trying to learn how to do comics, which is how do I get started, or where do I find an artist, or what do I need to do in order to format something for print? These were all questions that I had that are very, very basic, but that people don't necessarily know when they're getting started. And so the more that I can arm people with that type of information, depending on what their goals are, the happier I am.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. Like, you've been doing this for so long, and I'm really interested in how, like, what motivated you to get into writing for comics? Did you grow up with them and you're like, I want to do this someday? Like, how did you get started?
Sure. So I'm going to age myself here a little bit, unfortunately. But so I started in comics because back in the day, grocery stores would have them on the spinner racks over by the magazine section. And that was a much larger section than it is by today's standards. And my mother would, for a piece of an hour, be like, if you can stand over by that group of magazines and be quiet and not make a scene and let mama go do grocery shopping for an hour and have a little time away from the little kids, then I will buy you a comic book. And that is how I started to get into like some of the Archie books or Archie's version of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Sonic the Hedgehog, like a lot of indie kind of publishing, some Batman, some X-Men, but really nothing that was mainstream because that just wasn't what was necessarily on the spinner rack. And from that, I started deciding to make my own comics at home. I had lined pieces of paper and I would just grid them out into like a 9-panel grid because I didn't realize that you can have different types of grids on pages. And I started making comics about silly little superhero characters that, at the age of 5 or 8 or whatever, 10, however old I was, I thought were kind of fun and ridiculous to do. And then as time went on, like that pivoted in college where I stopped making comics for 2 years. I mean, I was doing it so much in high school that I would scribble on like my homework and my tests, and my teachers would give me extra work to do because they're like, we want to know how the adventure ends, like what happens next. And when I went to college, I was like, well, I'm paying to be here, so I should probably stop doing that and pay attention. So I took 2 years off, and friends of mine started doing this new hip thing called webcomics, which had not really existed in the mainstream prior to that. We're talking, around the year 2000. Is when this was. And so I got back into it through them. They were doing a jam style webcomic where one person writes and draws a page, and then somebody else continues that story with the same characters and writes and draws the next page. And that was fun, and that started to get me back interested into storytelling. At the time, I was doing art, so I was illustrating some of those pages. It got me into doing digital coloring and web formatting, which were completely new skill sets for me as well, and snowballed that into self-publishing my first comic, and was going to conventions as a fan, and just decided one day to pivot and said, hey, I'm going to go and see what is it that I need to do? What is it that I need to prepare for in order to be on the selling side of this table? I really want to try to do that. And so I went there with the intention of picking people's brains. Like, hey, so lovely to meet you. Yes, tell me about your book. I will buy one, but also tell me what you did to kind of make that book and to get a table at the convention. And so I was really absorbing a lot of information, and was lucky enough to have two gentlemen who worked at DC Comics, Joshua Elder and Russell Lissau, take me under their wing and help get me my first table at a convention. And through them kind of started to get into the convention scene, to get into the indie comic scene and the self-publishing scene, and always maintained and continued to maintain a love of web comics, which has then snowballed into webtoons and particular platforms and formats within the digital space. But my love is always on the print side. And so even if I'm doing those, like I'm always trying to think about like, well, how will I format this for a physical book? Or, I remember my very first convention, I was tabling next to Russell, and I had one little 54-page black and white book. And I was so proud of this thing. And now I'm, of course, embarrassed by it 20 years later. But at the time, I was so proud of this thing. And I remember looking over at him and saying, like, is there a more satisfying feeling in life than putting your blood, sweat, and tears into this project that you've dedicated months and months and months to, and being able to hold a physical copy of it in your hand? And he said, yes, there is. Seeing that same book in somebody else's hand while they wait in line to pay you for it. And he was not wrong. And having done this for so long, having built up a plethora of different fans over the years, some of them have become personal friends of mine. Some of them I have mentored into helping to tell their story. The rewards just keep reaping in, and it's not necessarily something that's monetary value that I'm talking about when I say rewards. It's the relationship rewards. It's the emotional highs and lows that you get with seeing the creative process through other people and through yourself, and being able to make that connection with other people, whether they're on the same side of the table or not at a convention with you. So, long answer to a short question. I just kind of stumbled into comics.
Yeah.
And just had a love of storytelling. And that love has never faded. That love has never gone away. And again, it's now kind of helped to pivot my life into how do I help people who love storytelling as much as I do to get armed with the tools and experiences that they need to be able to go out and tell their stories. Because everyone's got a story in us. And unless you can read minds, which I don't know about you, but I can't, I'm never going to know what that story is unless they put it out into the world.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing that moving from traditional print comic publishing, you're at conventions, you are meeting fans, you are meeting new people, and you're sharing your work. Like, I feel like that's a connection that in webtoons we don't really get unless the creator does go to a con themselves. I feel like, it's you don't get that connection with your readers that you would with like a physical copy of your story.
I think you can and you can't, right? Because one of the benefits that webtoons or webcomics in general has is that immediate fan feedback, the reactions, the comments, the community that you can build through either your own creator profile page on a platform like webtoons or through your own Discord or some of those. I think the format of those relationships just changes slightly when they're digital. I'm a traditionalist, so like I always think that there's a little bit more value in the face-to-face meeting of people, but I also recognize that that can intimidate some people, not just creators, but also fans. And they're more comfortable and more confident within a digital realm and a space. Whatever format that relationship and that connection takes, I'm all for it because I've been doing this long enough to see how people can kind of respond differently within online spaces versus in-person spaces. And having been on Webtoon, I have noticed a lot of comments where I'll announce like I will be at this location. Like if you would like to come meet me, swing by and say hi. And I like to think I'm a fairly approachable guy, but I'm 6'3". I'm tall. I'm loud, and I get very boisterous at conventions because that's just the personality that I project when I'm behind the table. And I recognize that that can be very intimidating for people. And there are people who have commented and said like, well, I wanted to meet you, but I was too afraid. And I'm like, please don't be afraid. Like, please come up and say hello. We don't have to exchange more than just a wave or a nod or whatever your comfort zone is. But if you would prefer to just engage with me in an online setting, that's fine too. Like, I'm happy to engage with you any way that you are comfortable with because everyone is going to be different. And that persona that I project at conventions is just that. It is a persona. My own personal self, like I'm an introvert, which you would never be able to tell by having a conversation with me at a convention because I just kind of flip a switch and I'm on and I'm there to promote and I'm there to be excited and I'm high energy. And then I go back to my hotel room and I just crash. But again, so not to contradict, but to sit there and kind of say like, I do think that that sense of connection to readers can still exist. And however people engage through either their comfort zone or their geographic location or a combination of the two, I think it's a beautiful thing. And I think it's a wonderful thing that a platform like Webtoon has unlocked for creators, especially and for fans, especially for those who may not necessarily have the same level of outgoingness and confidence that I project when I'm at a convention.
Yeah, and I like that with, you know, webtoons or just webcomics, like you do get that immediate feedback from readers if they enjoyed the story. But aside from the comics on a webcomic, like in traditional print publishing, like how do you know if people are really enjoying the story aside from like sales of the comic?
You stole my punchline, sales numbers. The No, it's tricky, right? Because there's much more of a lag within print comics. And let me recategorize print comics into twofold, right? So there's the publishing space and then there's the self-publishing space. And the self-publishing space will usually include something like crowdfunding. Now, crowdfunding will give you a little bit more of an immediate reaction as to whether or not something has traction with readers, or if your audience is particularly engaged with it because they're giving you money to pre-order that project in real time. And that can show you some of the excitement and enthusiasm that they might have for that particular thing. On the publishing side, it's much, much different because publishing tends to have a 12 to 18 month lead time on anything that's coming out from publishers. And in some instances, it may even be longer than that in order to get it. I mean, I'm working on an unannounced book series right now that isn't going to come out until 26 or 28. And it's 5, 10 books that are going to be a part of this series. And we believe in the project. We know that it has a lot of gumption. We think that it's a very exciting thing, but ultimately, how's it going to end up doing in sales? And what's the market even going to look like in 2, 4 years down the road to potentially impact a project like that? So we're constantly having conversations around sales projections and audience and those pieces while we're trying to create this book and this series. So it's a bit more different. But in any instance of it, comics is a business. And that's the challenge that I think a lot of people tend to run into, especially if they have a background in like fine arts or pieces like that, where, they work on a project until it's perfect. Comics is art on a deadline, and webtoons in particular is art on a very extreme deadline, where you're trying to produce 30, 40, 50, 60 panels a week, which again, to me, translates into like 8 to 10 pages. It's like half a monthly book, but you're trying to do that weekly. So if we project that out, if we assume it's 10 pages a week, and a traditional printed comic book is 20 pages, which comes out monthly, you're doing 2 issues of a monthly comic book series per month in Webtoon. And so a lot of creators have come up with techniques to help mitigate that stress and help to meet those deadlines. And thankfully, Webtoon is very flexible in their guidelines when it comes to making those. So they'll reuse art assets, they'll use 3D backgrounds, they'll use photos as backgrounds that have been manipulated, they'll do whatever they can. I don't want to say corner cutting, but because that sounds disingenuous, but it's whatever they can do to save time and to be most efficient in their storytelling, they'll find a way to do it. And that innovation, that ingenuity, I think makes Webtoon really stand out when it comes to the creative process and the way that people kind of work to build that out. So, and I think that traditional publishing is trying to pick up on that and figure out how they can try to apply that to their own space. But it takes a long time to print stuff, especially if you're printing it overseas. I mean, a printer over in China can, make an issue in a day, but then it's got to get on a boat and it's got to come over here, and that takes a week, right? And so the lead times that and then it's got to go through customs, which takes another week, and then it's got to get shipped out to the distributors, and the distributors got to go through. So there's a whole process that it has to go through in order to get it out into the world and into your local comic book shop or into a bookstore or into wherever it may be that you're picking up that issue or that graphic novel. And that's why that lead time kind of exists. And so it's harder to kind of get that real-time feedback unless you are at a convention or you are at a signing or you're at some kind of event and you've already committed months to years into this potential project. And only then are you starting to get that feedback back from the audience. It's being able to kind of go from either like a isolation chamber, or in the case if you've got like a team, a bit of an echo chamber, and being able to then bring it out into the world and say, yes, now either our fears were justified or our rationales for why things work did indeed resonate with audiences. And that can be very satisfying, but the lead time to do it is significantly longer.
Yeah, it's so interesting because like I hear mangakas who spend an entire like month to get, well, not an entire month. I think they release chapters monthly, but they're longer. But it takes so much time that they're just grinding and grinding. Like I hear stories all the time of not just mangakas, but like comic artists in general creating entire volumes, and they have their deadlines, right? And then compare it to webtoons, like you said, with a weekly update schedule with like 8 to 10 pages or 50 to 60 panels. Like, so it's no wonder that creators have to find a way to streamline their process and make it as quick as possible because they have the crazy deadlines, at least with, contracted creators like on Webtoon Originals.
Mm-hmm.
Canvas creators, like we don't have to put that pressure on ourselves, but I think we do because we want to put out more episodes. We want people to like our story. We want to put out as often as possible to get more eyes on it. Like if somebody does use 3D backgrounds, if they reuse panels, people come out and they're like, "Oh, that's not how you should do it. You should draw your own background."
The wonderful thing about webtoons is who's to say what you should or should not do. I think the one thing that everyone's pretty in sync about is, maybe don't do AI art.
Yeah,
because
yeah,
that takes from creators, and that's not necessarily the bevy of talent. But I've seen multiple webtoon creators who will hire assistants or hire teams to kind of help them with backgrounds or to help them with drawing the story. I mean, there are so many big webtoons out there where the lead creator doesn't even do anything outside of layouts anymore. Like they hire an entire artist team to kind of take that on for them, and the print manga overseas, like that operates very similar to them, where they've got an entire team of people that are supporting the rapid production of that story. For me, it all comes down to sustainability, right? Like what's going to be sustainable for you from a time commitment, from a mental health commitment, from an economics commitment for those things. With Repossessed, it was just me and my artist Yishan Lee, and she was doing all the art, all the colors, all the background, all the lettering herself. But she has established a process through her years of doing both print comics and web comics where she's able to do that sustainably and juggle multiple projects at the same time, because she was doing our series and then she launched RE Trailer Trash. And then she was doing a couple of webtoons over in France and a few others at the same time. She's a machine. And like
That's crazy.
I can pop out a webtoon script in an hour, right? Maybe two if it's not coming to me, but I've kind of come up with a process that helps me expediency that project. So when her and I were starting, like I would send her 5 scripts in a day and just be like, here's everything. This is going to give me plenty of time, and now I'm just going to switch to weekly scripts. And at the end of the week, she had layouts done for all 5 of those. And I'm like,
Wow.
what? And so suddenly I have to write 5 more next week. And that throws off my process because I was only planning to do like 1 in the next 4 weeks, not 5 in the next 5 days. And I've got other projects that I'm trying to juggle on the back end as well. For the writer, your involvement in the project tends to be a little less time consuming than the artist, who has to do the directing, the acting, the cinematography, like, all the things from a film perspective, because that's the visual components of a comic. And if you don't have the visual components of a comic, then you might as well just be writing a novel. On the juxtaposition side of that with Nexus Point, my artist over there has another job that he's juggling, and he's got other art projects that he's doing. He worked on a video game nobody's ever heard of called Fortnite, right? Like that's a big time commitment that he's got going as well, and it pays really, really well too. So it all comes down to sustainability and what he can end up doing. On Nexus Point, we have taken more breaks. We're on a break right now, and we launched Nexus Point before we did Repossessed, and Repossessed has 100 episodes. We took 1 break, which was in between seasons. We didn't need that break. Like we were already working on season 2 as soon as they gave us the green light, and Yishan was just churning out episodes like a machine. And she's wonderful to work with. I absolutely love Isha. And, but that series is done now and it's 100 episodes. We're only going to end up doing 65 episodes with Nexus Point, and right now only 50 of them are done, and then we're working on our final 15 episodes right now. So it all comes down to sustainability, what you can realistically do with the other responsibilities that you have in your life, with the other commitments that you have made to school, to work, to relationships, to family, to whatever it may be. And just making sure that you can maintain a consistent schedule. It doesn't matter if it's 60 panels weekly. Maybe it's only 10 panels every 3 weeks. That's fine. Consistency, I think, is the most important piece, and figuring out what that consistent pace is for you, and then being able to pivot when life throws you a curveball, because it will, and suddenly you are, in a relationship with somebody, or suddenly you've got a whole bunch of birthday parties or holidays in a particular month that take time away from that creative process. And you need to either have a buffer filled up, or you just need to have enough understanding with your readers to sit there and say, hey guys, I need to take the next 4 weeks off because we've got back-to-back holidays, birthdays, and, I'm taking a vacation, which I'm long overdue for, whatever the reason may be. And hopefully, and more often than not they do, the readers understand and they keep coming back for more because they're invested in the story, in the characters, in you as a creator.
Yeah. So I'm interested to hear, you've done the traditional comic publishing, you've done web comics, but I'm really interested, how did you get into webtoons in particular, and how did you get greenlit for 2 original series?
The second part of that question is hilarious, at least to me. So how did I get started? I got introduced to an editor over there. I mean, there's really 2 ways to kind of get started on webtoons, right? So one is to have a series on canvas and to have it attract the attention of the editorial team, and to have them reach out to you and give an invite to kind of pitch your story to become an original. And there's a lot of success in that I have seen from other creators. That was not my approach. I went to a party and I got introduced to an editor, and I showed him the physical books that I made and said, hey, I'm an award-winning writer. I've primarily done print and web comics, which were really just print but digital. I've not done a vertical scroll story, and I would really like to do something with your platform. Like, let's have a conversation. Let's talk about where your opportunities are and your opportunities for growth. Let's see where we sync up, and let's try to pitch some stories and see if we can work together. And at the time that I was doing this, Webtoon really wanted to expand their offering of science fiction stories. It is one of the lowest read genres on the platform. To me, they really said, we want something that is hard science fiction, not sci-fi slash something else, not fantasy, not sci-fi fantasy, not sci-fi romance, not that. We want a science fiction story. I was like, okay, I do genre fiction. Like, I am all about a science fiction story. What else? They're like, two, we want something that promotes diversity, right? We don't just want like a cast that all looks homogenous and the same. So we want to have kind of a diverse cast and interesting characters that are very layered. I'm like, boom, that's my bread and butter. What else you got there? And they're like, three, we want something that is unlike any other series on our platform at all. And I was like, okay, now I need to do some research. So I started to deep dive into what are some of the popular tropes or things that go into webtoons, and how can we upend those? How can we kind of keep the audience guessing, as it were, with this particular series? And so romantic themes tend to be very popular in a lot of popular webtoon series. So I was like, we're not going to do that. And then, so there are a bunch of different things that we kind of tried to set the audience up for, and then kind of pull the rug out from under them a little bit by design. And when I pitched Nexus Point to Webtoon, they immediately fell in love with the idea. And Nexus Point is, again, about hackers fighting bounty hunters in a cyberpunk landscape, but that's not the story. The story is about a hacker named Jemmy, who's gotten into some trouble, and she, doesn't have parents there to kind of help her out. And it's about a father, Jack Travis, who's a former detective turned bounty hunter, who doesn't have a kid to kind of mentor, help out, and to also kind of teach him the important things that youth teach to the older people. And so the way that I pitched it was, there's a relationship in this story, but it's not a romantic one. It's a father-daughter relationship between two people who are not related. It's a found family story. And they loved that. They immediately latched on to that because nothing else was like that on the Webtoon platform. And we put it all under the guise of a political thriller structure. So there's a lot of questions and a lot of action that happens throughout the entire series. And then as the series starts to get towards the end, you start to get those answers. And Webtoon thought that was a great idea. But when I sent it in, I had no idea what they were going to kind of go for. So I probably sent them like 12 pitches at one time. Of just like, here's a smattering of different things that I'm interested in telling. Tell me what's kind of resonating with you. So they immediately picked up Nexus Point. They loved that one. There was another one that they liked as well that the artist kind of fizzled out on, unfortunately. So that one never saw the light of day. And we were probably 3 months into production on Nexus Point, and my editor introduced me to another editor who was going to be taking over for the series. And he was like, oh, and by the way, we would like to greenlight Re-possessed as well. And I was like, okay. And having 3 months of production under my belt with Nexus Point, I had learned, I think, a lot of what was working, what was not working, what was difficult or different on the platform versus print comics, and how to adapt my style to doing that. And so immediately kind of came up with a much more detailed pitch for Re-possessed so that they could see how this would kind of look and break out on an episode by episode basis. And they were like, we love this. Like, this is fantastic. And because that one's more of kind of an urban fantasy / modern day supernatural story, I think the audience really kind of gravitated towards that one as well. And Yishan's art style is, I think, a little bit more mainstream than Sebastian's. And so I've also heard some people kind of come back with Nexus Point where they're like, this looks so different. And I was like, yes, that was by design. They wanted something that was different and unique. And I think his art style is amazing. And again, you can see it all the time whenever he does the background and loading pages for Fortnite. But so long answer to a short question. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit. I got in just by meeting the right people, being in the right place at the right time, and having a body of work behind me that can kind of show the quality of the work that I can do and the diversity and stories and characters that I can do that with. And that's been a huge boon in my career, especially on Webtoon.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to hear that your foot in the door with Webtoon was really different than what I've heard other people. Most, in fact, if not all, the creators I talk to are like, we published on Canvas and then Webtoon really liked our series and then we pitched and then they gave us a green light. Like that is the common way that I hear people get into like Webtoon originals. So it's interesting to hear that you kind of just were like, you met the editor and you're like, yeah, well, I do print publishing. I got years and years of experience, and I think it's really interesting.
I think too that a lot of Canvas creators, tend to be more youthful, so they don't necessarily have that portfolio of work behind them. That Canvas series becomes that portfolio, that proof of concept. Again, giving them that foot into the door, I think, is a wonderful thing that Webtoon takes advantage of. So I'm so glad that people get that opportunity. Plus, they're constantly hosting contests for people to submit their series to potentially get transitioned over into the originals platforms. It's good. They operate both as like a publisher and a platform, and I think that's kind of a unique space to play in.
So I wanted to ask, how did you find the artist for Repossessed and for Nexus Point? Did you just post
Sure.
online and you're like, I'm looking for artists? Or how did you find them?
I'm constantly approaching artists and trying to establish a rapport with them. I usually meet them online because they've got online portfolios. They're constantly posting their artwork. If there's things there that attract my eye that I think would be really fun to potentially do within a series, then I'll reach out and I'll try to establish that relationship with them. With Nexus Point, well, and with any series, with any artist that I kind of talk to and we're talking about a potential project here, I always start the conversation with two questions. What do you like to draw? And what do you not like to draw? Because that's very important. Because if somebody comes back to me and they're like, I really like to draw dragons and horses, I'm not going to pitch them a science fiction story. So, or, if somebody's like, I hate drawing cars, but I like drawing modern day stories, then we're not going to tell a story about a race car driver. It helps me to kind of figure out what do they like, what do they not like, and then they'll be able to bring more to the project in terms of passion, in terms of creativity, in terms of design and story, and they'll have ideas about those things. And so Sebastian and I had been talking for a while. He posts a lot of video game fighting art and a lot of science fiction kind of art. And I was like, hey, Webtoon just approached me and said, they want to do a sci-fi story. You want to maybe work on a project together?
Yeah.
It's an awkward conversation to have. It's a little bit like asking someone out on a date for the first time. And whenever I do workshops about like print comics, I always recommend start short, because the first thing you do when you ask someone out isn't like, will you marry me? It's, will you go out for coffee? And a short story is like the comic book making equivalent of like, will you go out for coffee with me? But with Webtoon, because you're doing like a full season of usually at least 25, sometimes 50 or 60 episodes, like it's a much larger commitment, and there needs to be a lot of trust and rapport between the creators. And I didn't have a lot of relationship with Sebastian from a professional perspective up until that time, but knowing that he could hit deadlines, knowing that he had a body of work behind him that was storytelling driven, but also in video games, at least answered some of those questions for me when it came to, can he hit deadlines? Can he, will he commit to this project? And is he going to bring something fun and interesting to the table? And he did. I mean, he was gung ho about it, and I love the man to death. This is why most of the people that I end up working with either become like really, really close friends with me outside of even projects, right? Like Sebastian's got a couple of cats. Like whenever he's got a household crisis that's going on, like we're always there for each other. And Yishan was very similar. Like, so Yishan I had met because she was attached to a Kickstarter campaign that was going on. And Yishan's also done a lot of traditional print comic books and was, like me, eager to try a vertical scroll story. She lives out of China. She was working on a couple of French webtoon platform series at the time and was like, hey, I really want to get on the American platform for webtoons as well. And so I was pitching her kind of some ideas. And a lot of the comics that she's done from a print perspective are like supernatural or romance or those types of stories. Some of the stuff that she's done tends to lean on the spicier side as well. And so when I pitched her this idea for Repossessed, she had one question for me, which is, do I have to draw naked people? And I was like, no, they don't allow that on Webtoon. Like we're
Yeah.
actively discouraged from from that, and it's not really like a part of the story. And she's like, I'm in. And
Wow.
she's like, toilet monsters, no problem. Like, that's in the first episode of Repossessed. We got man-eating toilets in the first episode.
Hmm.
And so she's just been really, really fun to work with. And so we crafted the story. She likes the fact that there are very strong female-driven characters within the series. I grew up watching movies like Terminator 2 and Aliens, and so like I really like to have these multi-nuanced kind of characters in there that may not necessarily be what you think they are the first time you meet them. And so she got really excited for a lot of those reveals as the series kind of went on. And as we started to get towards the end of season one, we were asking Webtoon, like, hey, we need to know, are we getting greenlit for a season two or not? Because I got to know if this is a the end or a to be continued. Like, you got to tell me what I'm setting up here. And when they finally like gave us the green light for season two, they're like, you're getting 50 more episodes, but that's it. Like after that, it's all kind of done. And so I went to Yishan and I was like, hey, do you want to kind of like troll the brand safety team over at Webtoon a little bit? See if we can make them a little uncomfortable. And she's like,
Oh no.
yes. She's like, let's do it. And so like the end of season one and like all of season two was like us just being like, what can we get away with in this episode?
Oh my goodness.
It's so again, like for long answer to a short question, like I'm meeting these creators online. We're establishing a rapport. Like we are in sync with each other. We're on the same page and we have similar interests in the types of stories we want to tell or the types of characters that we want to write or draw and project out into the world. And we just have fun with it. Like yes, it's work. Yes, it's a job, but it's the best job. And I absolutely love the people that I work with, and anytime that I can, I try to work with them again. And even if I can't, like I'm their biggest advocate that I can possibly be. So that's how I got my two artists for that series. That's how I continue to meet artists. And again, whenever I approach somebody for a project, it's always going to be with two questions. What do you like to draw? What do you not like to draw? And we'll go from there.
That's amazing. So how does the collaboration look like with an artist working on a webtoon series? Because most people that I talk to do it all themselves. Like they do the storytelling and they do they do the entire thing. So I'm interested to see what it looks like maybe on even on a day-to-day basis working with your artists on these series.
Yeah, so I mean, it all starts with the script. Let me back up. Uh, because you've got an editorial team in there, right? And Webtoon has a financial investment in the story that you're telling and what you're doing. You typically have to give them, summaries of what your season's going to look like, perhaps some highlights from a couple of key episodes. I like to do like a season outline. So each episode, like, here's a couple sentences about what happens. I make sure that my artists are also, have a chance to review that as well, just to make sure that we've, heaven forbid they haven't communicated, like, I don't like to draw cars and you've got like 3 car related episodes in here, right? Like, because we can easily pivot when we're in that outline stage, and a lot of notes can be exchanged there. Thankfully, there were not a lot of notes on either of my series, and everyone was on board, so we immediately just go into the scripting process. And for me, webtoons are a bit easier to script than a traditional comic page. They take a lot less time for me, because I don't have to think about page layouts when I'm just constructing an infinite vertical canvas of panels layered on top of panels. I don't have to think about, is this a horizontal panel? Is this a vertical panel? How many panels are we trying to fit on a page? Where's my big splash image? Like, am I going to have a 2-page spread on this particular thing? That doesn't apply within Webtoon, right? There are instances where you will have a more emotional moment or a higher resonance moment. With Nexus Point in particular, we've really tried to take advantage of the vertical scroll, and we tried to do reveals as you're going down, where it's you think this panel is one thing and then it changes into something else towards the end, which is a lot of fun to do, but takes a little bit of time and coordination in order to create those moments. And then the artists will usually take those. If they have any notes, they'll submit them in, but usually they'll just jump right into layouts. And then we'll talk about the layouts amongst ourselves or with the editorial team. If they've got any kind of changes, we'll make those in there, and then they move on to their final inks. We move that on to colors and then letters. And with Nexus Point, we've got a different person that does our colors and our letters than we do as our artist. I've got right now, Sebastian doing the art, Cameron, who works on Batman Wayne Family Adventures, she's doing our
Yeah.
colors, and then Micah Myers is doing our letters. And so again, everything just keeps coming back to that script, and heaven forbid Sebastian, change a panel or combine two panels or split something out into two or three panels that wasn't in there. Like, I've got to go back into the script and make that adjustment. So my letterer is not like, wait a minute, there are 56 panels
Yeah.
here, but there's only 50 panels in the script. So we have to coordinate and just make sure that there's no confusion when and as those changes happen. And I've worked with Sebastian enough to trust him to make those types of decisions. If he thinks that something needs to be more panels or less panels, by all means, right? Like, let's, and if I disagree, we'll have a conversation. But usually he's got a really good reason for doing it. And I trust him. I trust him to do that. And Yishan's the same way. Like, I mean, Yishan will turn in really, really tight layouts. I mean, they're basically just inked pages, or inked panels for her stuff. And we'll get the green light on those, and she'll immediately go into colors and letters. And, she's a one-stop shop when it comes to those. And she's so fast. Like, she's an amazing person to work with, because she's not just juggling my series, but she's juggling multiple series, because she's doing RE Trailer Trash at the same time and whatever
Right.
French webtoons that she's working on, plus her print comics, plus her other stuff. Like, she's just unstoppable. And if we have like phone calls, I mean, she's 13, 14-hour time difference from me. And if we have phone calls, even if I'm trying to make it convenient for her and the timing, like, she's up until 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, her time,
Oh my goodness.
working on these things. So she just churns it out. And I imagine like a bear that just like eventually goes into hibernation when she reaches like a good stopping point, and then just like recharges and then comes back out and starts jumping back into it. But so our process again is as collaborative as we can possibly make it, working remotely. I mean, Sebastian's over in Barcelona, Yishan's over in China, so we're not able to like sit down in a coffee shop and talk about any of this stuff. It all has to be done virtually, and we'll do WhatsApp calls, or we'll do a video conferencing, or we'll just exchange emails, or they'll even just leave me notes in the script, and they'll be like, hey, I want to split this into two panels or whatever. I'm like, cool, no worries. Like, and we'll just make the adjustments on the fly and go. So it's fun, it's collaborative, and one of the things that I love about Webtoon or with print comics, whenever you're working with an artist, every time they give you an update, it's like a gift. It's like your birthday, and you've just gotten like this beautiful present. And sometimes I'm utterly surprised by what I get in the best ways possible. And sometimes I'm like, hold on, we might need to make a few corrections there. Did you get a gift receipt, for that particular panel? But more often than not, especially with those two, like, it's just been a dream project to work on. And the work that they're turning in just makes my jaw drop every single time that I see it. And it's amazing to see words that I put down on a page made into something that I can see with my eyes, into a visual kind of component. And there's no feeling like that in any other media that I've worked in so far. And it's just the most warming, welcoming feeling to work together with people and to put our story babies out into the world, if you were, because it is a process, and it is a collaborative one, and one that I absolutely enjoy. And kudos to anyone who can do it all themselves, because my goodness, man, like, it can be a slog to try to hit those deadlines. And at least like we have the opportunity to vent to each other, or to to air grievances, or to talk through problems that are coming up within there and find solutions together. They're not just in an isolation chamber. Like, we can come together as a team, and we can kind of solve these things together, so they know they're not alone doing it.
Yeah. What would you say is like the most challenging aspect of being in a team working on a webtoon series?
Getting the green light on a new story.
I mean, in your case, you have a pretty
That's
good
the hardest part. Yeah, well, but I mean, keep in mind, like, there's what you see, and then there's what actually happens behind the background. Because I had submitted 12 pitches to Webtoon, only 2 of them got made, right? And thankfully, like, because of who I am, and the body of work that I have, and the type of talent I was bringing to these particular series, I didn't necessarily have to go to Canvas and do a proof of concept episode or any of those types of things. That may not always be the case, but at least with these series that was. So I got very, very lucky and very, very fortunate with those pieces. And yes, I would still love to go back and come back to those previous pitches that I submitted and say, like, hey, is there maybe flavor for those now? because there's a number of different reasons to say no to a project. There might be something else that's already out there that's too similar. It might just not resonate with the editor. It might not be something they think is kind of fit for platform. Great story, but maybe not so great for our Webtoon audience and who we're kind of after here, right? There's a number of different reasons to say no, and those conditions change constantly. So I would love to potentially go back to those pieces at some time. But for me, the hardest part's just been getting that green light, and I've been blessed in my career to not have an instance where like I didn't gel with an artist. Except for one. There was one instance where I had a guy who, this was not Webtoon related, but it was a comic that I was going to self-publish. And, he was turning in great pages, like we were having a great time, and then COVID hit. And, I was trying to give him as much grace as I possibly could because everyone was going through different things during that time. But he ghosted me for like 6 to 8 months and then wasn't responding to emails, wasn't responding to messages. Like I got nothing back from the guy. I had no idea what was happening. I didn't know if he'd left the country. I didn't know if he was in the hospital. I had no idea what was happening. And he reached out to me again after like the 8-month gap. And he's like, "Hey, I'm going to get you like 3 pages this week." And I was like, "What? Okay. Where have you been? Are you all right?"
Yeah.
What happened here? And he didn't get them to me in a week. He got them to me in 3 months, and he drew them wrong. He drew the wrong characters and the wrong panels. And it was just an instance of like either you've been too far removed from the project for too long to remember who this character is, or you don't care, or whatever. And it's the only instance where I've had to let an artist go, where I was just like, "Look, dude, thanks, but no thanks. Like this clearly didn't work out, and we have to part ways." And it's unfortunate because the pages that he was turning in were wonderful. He did about a third of the book. So I've got 30 odd some pages that will never see the light of day because I can't use them. And 3 of those pages I can't use at all because he put the wrong characters in the wrong panels. So, so it's that those types of situations can be difficult. But again, I like to kind of vet my artists before in advance. Like if you can work on a short story project together first, that will help you to figure out what those red flags are or where those areas of incompatibility may be. And it's a lot easier to part ways after only having worked on like 5 pages than it is after having worked on or trying to work on like 100 pages and you only get 30 in. And suddenly you've made a large financial and time commitment into a project, and so have they, that nobody's going to be able to benefit from, and readers will never be able to get into. And so when and if you can, if you are a writer who is working with an artist or an artist that's working with a writer, like go on that coffee date, right? Like do that short story together. Sometimes the pitch project can be like that short story, and you can start to figure out like, do we gel? Do we get along? Do we see the story the same way and the characters the same way? Do we like the collaboration that we're having with each other? And if not, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I wish you the best and, safety on your journey. But if it is, if that collaboration does exist, then it's, hey, like, let's go full throttle and acceleration on this thing. And even if it's not this project, let's find something else to work on together because you feed off of that enthusiasm and that energy of each other. And that passion to want to put a project out that you've both worked on. And again, that's a huge motivator for me. And even though that's not necessarily like the most difficult thing that's kind of on there, it's, finding that creator and vetting that creator and getting them as interested and as passionate into the project as you are, can be a challenge. But again, I usually overcome that with 2 questions. What do you like to draw? What do you not like to draw? Because if I'm including a lot of things you don't like to draw, then I'm being a jerk. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's so important, especially in a team dynamic, that all of you are passionate about the story and like the vision, and you're all aligned in that aspect, and it just turns out a better story in that sense if you guys are all on the same page of both passionate vision.
100%.
So how has your experience in like your 20 years experience has helped you, like with print publishing, how has that helped you do storytelling in a strategic way with webtoons?
Yeah, Well, a couple of things. One, I think it's helped me to understand how to hit deadlines, right? Especially if you've never had any kind of print deadline on your shoulders before. I mean, there's other deadlines that people have, right? Homework, school, studying for tests. Like these are great ways to kind of apply those into what eventually becomes like publishing deadlines. But there's so many different balls that need to get juggled in there, especially if you're a writer and you're working with an artist who then also needs a colorist, who then also needs a letterer. Like you've got to make sure that, hey, if we're trying to get this episode out by Saturday, my script is done by the previous week. The artist might need like a week or two to do the artwork on there, so we've got to build out those lead times. Colorist needs a couple of days, letterer needs like a day or two, and then we've got to get enough time to get editorial approval and review. You start to put together kind of a project manager mindset about how to do a particular project. And while that's very specific, and my background is in marketing, so like that's just how my brain works, that could be an adjustment for a lot of people who are used to doing it a little bit more off the cuff or a little bit more loosey-goosey when it comes to deadlines. Like comic books is commercial art. Commercial art is art by a deadline. And I think it's very easy for creators, especially first-time creators, to sit there and be like, well, this isn't perfect. And you have to blow perfect out of your brain completely because that's not what commercial art is. You have to find a way to be okay with good enough because you've
Yep.
got to get it to that deadline. It's got to look professional. It's got to look appealing and attractive to the readers and to the editors. And you've got to be able to churn it out by deadline or before every single time consistently week after week after week. And that is a grind. That is a
Mhm.
lot of work, especially for somebody who might be doing all of that by themselves. And I have the highest amount of respect for those individuals because I can't do that. I don't have that kind of talent. That's not where my expertise lies. And I also have the benefit of having a team there that if I do need to vent or if I do have a problem that I can't solve, I can pick their brains on it or vice versa. And that's a wonderful piece for me and part of my process that I have there, but may not necessarily exist for some of the creators that are kind of in that isolation chamber. The other thing that I think print comics have helped me with is story pacing and having that background in there. And pacing was one of the things that I was most nervous about when it came to building up Webtoon, because the Webtoon episodes and scenes tend to last a bit longer than they do in print comics. Like print comics, right, tend to be 4 to 6 panels a page. You're usually shifting scenes every 2 to 4 pages, and you've got like a 20-page issue that comes out on a month-to-month basis. With Webtoon, because each episode translates into about 8 to 10 pages of stuff, but you're only going to get like 2, maybe 3 scenes in there. So you've got much longer scenes that your scenes can breathe a little bit more, your dialogue can exist a bit more, or you can really ramp up the pace and try to keep that same scene pacing of every 2 to 4 pages, right? In which case you've got 8 to 4 scenes going on within a particular episode. Like that's a lot. And whenever I wrote those, I was like, this feels rushed. Like you're only getting like a couple of panels per scene, and then you're going on to the next one and you're jumping around a bit. And I think that that's a really interesting kind of way to do different storytelling within those different media within a vertical scroll versus that page turn, because like traditional comics are all about that page turn, and you don't have that luxury within the vertical scroll. It's how do you get people to keep thumbing up to get to the next panel to eventually get to the end of that episode, and how do you keep them engaged with those, and how do you help them to understand scene transition? There's a lot of different things that you can do within Webtoons too. Like you can add in animation, you can add in music, you can add in multimedia facets to it that you can't do within the print space, which we've experimented a little bit with music, but we haven't done animation in any of the series that I've worked on so far. And the music that we did, I mean, we just have it start at the beginning of the episode and go all the way to the end of the episode. And part of that is a lack of technical savvy on my part. And part of that is also because the music that we got for Nexus Point was done by my buddy Johnny Young Bosch, who's an anime voice actor.
What?
Yeah. And so Johnny and I were out at Emerald City one day. We were at Emerald City Comic Con. We had dinner. We were asking each other what each other was working on, and I was telling him about these new Webtoon things that I was starting. And he's like, "Oh, is there something I could do for that? Can I do voice work for it?" And I'm like, "I don't." I'm like, "I know you could put sound in there, but I don't know if you could like read the panels or something as we're scrolling." And so I was like, I know we can put music in there, and he's got a band, and he's like, "Dude, I would love to do like some music for your series." And I thought he would turn in like, a 30-second little ditty, like nothing major. 6.5 minutes. He made a 6.5 minute song
What?
for Nexus Point, and it's awesome, and it builds, and it's amazing. And every time we post that in the episodes, I'm like, I don't even want to cut it because it's just so good. Like, just go to the first episode of Nexus Point, turn on the sound, and you don't even have to scroll. It'll just play for 6.5 minutes, and you can listen to a free Johnny Young Bosch song. And
Wow.
he did the trailer too, that we made for it, that's on YouTube, and he did the voice work for that one. He voices uh, Jack Travis, one of the leads. So for me, like we've played with that a little bit, but like print did not prepare me for that. So there
Mm.
are new skills and new techniques that I've had to learn in Webtoon that print publishing did not prepare me for at all. And then I'm in, discords and conversations with other Webtoon creators that are now trying to like shift the format of their vertical scroll into print comics. And so we'll have conversations all the time about like, well, how do the page turn transitions work, and what are some of the techniques that they can use as they're making that translation? Do they need to add more panels or less in order to kind of fill in those page counts? And so it's been a very good collaborative learning experience. I think I've learned tons from those creators, and then I've tried to share as much knowledge as they want, or as much as I can when it comes to the print side of things. There are things that translate and there are things that don't, I guess, is the short answer to the question.
Yeah, yeah, that's so interesting. Let's get into more of like the nitty-gritty of the storytelling aspect because you have so much experience with it.
For me, it always comes back to the question of why. Like, why does this story exist? Why this story? Why these characters? Why this platform? If you can't answer those questions, then it becomes hard. And for me, I always try to think about like, what does the story look like on the surface? And then what is the story really about? Let's take Nexus Point as an example. So Nexus Point is a story about a hacker named Jemmy who starts her very first job at a large tech firm. She's a hacker, so she's trying to help them strengthen their defenses in this space, and she's the best hacker in the market. So she naturally breaks through them all, stumbles upon something she was never meant to see, and suddenly she's being chased by crooked cops and rogue hackers and this mysterious paramilitary organization that all seem to want her dead. And the only person that can keep her safe is Jack Travis, this detective turned bounty hunter who's been hired to bring her in dead or alive. Like that's what the story looks like on the surface. What the story is actually about is about a found family between a father who's lost a daughter and a daughter who's lost a father, and a relationship between these two characters forging that is not, we tried really hard to balance it so it's not one-sided. Like we wanted this to kind of be like Buffy and Giles, like mentor mentee, but those roles shift back and forth. So he has strengths. He's a very traditionalist kind of character who does not know a lot about technology, but knows a lot about people and knows a lot about the world outside. And she's very savvy when it comes to the digital world. But when people are chasing after her, she's like, I don't have survival skills. Like, I don't have those types of things that I can do. But there are skills that complement each other. One of our first big action beats that we have in the series where the two of them finally team up, the building that they're in is being attacked, and there are drones outside that are like watching their every move and tracking them. And, every floor they get to, like their soldiers are trying to head them off because the soldiers already know where they're going. So Jemmy hacks all the drones and starts weaponizing them and uses them to like hit the soldiers. Like she punches a guy with a drone that she's hacked at one point in the series. And that was her like applying the digital into the physical. And I was like, this is a fun dynamic where it's like she's aiding in a way that Jack can't, and he's doing his best with the stuff that he's working on, but she's contributing in ways that greatly outweigh like the benefit that he's doing. Like he's treading water and she's swimming laps. Like these are the two things that we try to have them do. And going back to the question, right? Like where does the story come from? Like for me, it's how do you put these two characters into situations that allow them to kind of shift those roles between mentor and mentee, keep that interesting and dynamic in a way that audiences are going to keep coming back for, and then also make them care about these characters so that when you put them in danger, the audience is rooting for them and wants to see them get out of those situations. And within Webtoon, you have a very short window in order to kind of establish all of those things, and it's usually 10 to 20 panels. Like if your readership does not care about your characters within that time, they're not going to finish the first episode. If they don't care about your characters and the cliffhanger at the end of your first episode, they're not going to tune into the next couple of episodes. They're not going to subscribe. And heaven forbid, they're not going to come back on a weekly basis for a year for 50 odd some episodes.